Hello and welcome to Module 3, Research Design of our Research and Data Analysis course. Today we're going to talk about chapters 7, 8, 12, and 15. This isn't too long of a lecture slide, but it will probably be a little bit on the longer side. So first, let's get into chapter 7. We talk about quantitative research designs. With quantitative research designs, we have a couple things that we do. First, manipulation of the IVs, or the independent variables. This is when the researcher is going to intentionally vary or change independent variables and how they are presented to participants. If we want to talk about manipulation of IVs, this could be something like, I did a study on trigger warnings on TikTok. I had two conditions, my control condition and my treatment condition. My control condition did not receive any sort of trigger warning because that's what I wanted to manipulate. So they watched a TikTok and it did not have a trigger warning. My treatment group, or my group that had the manipulation, did receive a trigger warning on the TikTok that they watched. This is all about that manipulation, so I can see how that's going to impact participants in my study. Next, we talk about random assignment of our participants. So we separate our participants into treatment or control groups randomly. What this means is I don't know who is going into what group, but everybody has the same amount of chance of getting into either of the groups. Everybody has the same percentage to randomly be assigned to my treatment group or my control group. We talk about experimental frameworks. Excuse me. So with experimental research, it's often conducted in an environment that is going to be controlled by the researcher. This could be something like a survey where you only see what I want you to see. This could be an actual experiment where you come into a lab, or we create some sort of a setting for you. With this, we talk about the classical experiment. The researcher is going to control the treatment or the manipulation of the independent variables by randomly assigning participants to a treatment or control group. So treatment, participants who receive the stimulus, or control, no treatment or manipulation, right? The experiment I was talking about with trigger warnings on TikTok, this is a classical experiment. I had the two groups, the treatment and the control. Participants were randomly assigned, and they either did or did not receive any manipulation of the stimulus. We talk about manipulation checks as well. So we want to make sure that our participants are actually going to pay attention to what we want them to pay attention to. We want them to regard the independent variables in a specific way, and we don't want them to just click through if it is a survey. And therefore, we use manipulation checks. For my trigger warning study, we used, I think it was 4 manipulation check questions. And the one that rings a bell was, what was this TikTok about? And they had simple answers. It was a dance, it was a comedy sketch, it was a content creator sharing their narrative, and I can't remember what the fourth one was. They were all things that we typically see on TikTok, and if you were paying attention, you would know it is a content creator sharing their narrative. So moving forward, we talk about types of experimental design. First is the post-test only design. This is going to be a comparison that's going to conclude that there were significant differences found that are due to the treatment or manipulation. So what this means is everybody is going to get these questions, but their answers might vary once we test them again, or not test them again. I apologize. Disregard that. The post-test only design is we're going to give them this treatment. We're going to give them some sort of manipulation, and we're going to then ask everybody questions. With this in mind, we should see differences between the two groups, right? Because we've only tested them after we've given the stimulus. What I was talking about when I misspoke a second ago was the pre-test, post-test design. We want to measure dependent variables, or DVs, before exposing the treatment group to the stimulus, and then remeasuring the DV after the stimulus is given. So With this trigger warning study, what I did was I tested them to get baseline anxiety, depression, mental illness, or mental states. I wanted to check on that as a baseline, and then I had them watch the TikTok, and then I asked questions again. This is because I wanted to see the differences. Funny enough, we didn't find the differences that we thought we were going to find. People actually were either angry or empowered. It was pretty interesting to find. We talk about factorial designs as an experimental design. So the treatment groups are going to be based on 2 or more independent variables that we use for complex cause and effect relationships. So treatment groups are going to be 2 independent variables or more, and we say that this is causing this, and they're pretty complex. So first we have the interaction effect, how the independent variable can combine to influence the dependent variable. So how these 2 variables work together in order to influence that dependent variable. Then we talk about the main effect, which is the influence of one independent variable by itself, and we don't even consider the influence of the other independent variables. So we found some differences in this specific variable, but we don't necessarily have any outside variables impacting it. There's not an interaction effect. Okay. We talk about longitudinal designs. So these are going to be experiments that there are going to be multiple measurements of that dependent variable. When I was at West Virginia, we talked about an intervention in my preventions and interventions course where we were going to send information home with students in Kanawha County, West Virginia, one of the most and heavily impacted counties in the state due to opiates and opiate-related drug use. And we wanted to measure what they knew at multiple times. So at the beginning, when we handed this information out, then again 6 months later, then again a year later, and it could keep going every 6 months or every year after that, whatever the researchers wanted to do. But we do it over a period of time. We also talk about quasi-experimental designs. So there are natural variations on the independent variable. Participants are not necessarily, or necessarily was not the correct word, I apologize. Participants are not going to be randomly assigned to treatment or control groups because that variation is going to exist naturally. So if we wanted to study a quasi or have a quasi-experimental design for the trigger warnings on TikTok, right? You scrolling through your TikTok, depending on your specific algorithm, depending on your specific likes and dislikes, what you interact with is going to change what you see. So you might see more trigger warnings being used to it, or you might see none at all or less, right? That's going to be quasi-experimental because it is going to be a natural variation just based on your own algorithm. We talk about field experiments. So the researcher is still going to control the manipulation of the independent variables and random assignments, but the environment is going to be realistic or natural. So field experiments, we did one at West Virginia that I was a part of, and we had this room set up. It was one of our labs where we would have students come in because we use convenience sampling. Again, we'll talk about that later, but we would have these labs set up and we would have students come in and play video games. This was a field experiment because we made the environment as realistic as possible. So in the room, there was a 2-way mirror where we could see everything that was going on, but you wouldn't notice the mirror unless you were a Confederate. Again, we'll talk about that later, or you were a person who was a part of the research study, because we had the room set up like it was a basic living room. Something you would see at anybody's house. It was very realistic, but we still controlled that manipulation of independent variables and random assignment. We also talk about descriptive designs. So these can be called cross-sectional, non-experimental designs, and the researcher does not have direct control over independent variables, and participants are not going to be randomly assigned. So these are just things that are happening. We are not doing any sort of manipulation, and we don't randomly assign participants to their conditions. Moving forward in Chapter 7, we talk about the researcher effects and procedural bias. So first, there are research protocols. This details every procedural step of the study. When you see research studies that are being published, you will see that they talk about here's the participants, here's the manipulation checks, here's the variables we use, here's the alphas for all of those. We talk about all of that because we want to detail that so you know that there's not any bias. I did everything by the book. Okay. Moving forward, these are just a graph. I believe it is in your book. I cannot remember what chapter it is on though, or what page, not chapter, it's in chapter 7. But we talk about the experimental forms, and then we talk about manipulation and random assignment and where they're present and where they're absent. All right, so moving right into chapter 8, what is a survey? So surveys are a system for collecting information. If you do quantitative research, surveys are a very easy way to collect information, and usually they are a much more quick way because we have the technology that makes it able to be done from anywhere. First, questionnaires, descriptive research design. So we have created that questionnaire. We have put together all the measures that we want to actually see. And then we have students or participants. I say students because that's typically the sample we use most. It's a convenient sample. We then have them take this questionnaire and respond based on their own thoughts and feelings. It is often self-administered, which leads to self-reporting, and individuals are going to read and then select a response on their own. This can be a great thing because you can read through it, you can go at your own pace, but also it can be a bad thing because self-reporting often shows that we might put down the answer that we think the researcher wants. And that leads into our social desirability response. This is that potential for participants to respond with answers that they believe the interviewer is going to be perceiving as favorable. So table 9.1 on page 150 works for this comparison survey type. So one thing that I have noticed with this social desirability response is depending on the topic, you may not get the direct answers that you want because participants are going to respond with how they think you want them to respond. It's not necessarily a terrible thing, but we can't necessarily generalize the state of the full population. Okay. All right, so we need to evaluate questionnaires or surveys. This is a thing that people should be doing often. We typically do this through confirmatory factor analyses, which is done through a computer program. I'm not going to get super into that later in the semester, but I will talk about it a little bit later on. So we evaluate the existing questionnaires. We do so by checking the Chromebox Alpha, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we want to use questionnaires that are already validated and reliable. This means that on a scale of 0.0 to 1.0, you're scoring at least a 0.7, but not scoring over, I would say probably a 0.9. If you're 0.9, you're good. You're saying that things are valid, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're measuring what they're supposed to be doing. But if you have something that is a 0.97, you're asking the same question basically over and over and over and over again, which is how you get to that 0.97 or whatever it is, because it's just asking the same thing. So we need to evaluate existing questionnaires and surveys. Next, we can write our own surveys. First, designing our survey items. We do so through closed questions. We give a statement or question and then a set of responses to select from. This could be, it's pronounced Likert or Likert type scales, but everybody says Likert because they don't like the way Likert sounds, but these are multi-item scales that ask respondents to respond to these items with choices of 1, strongly disagree, to 7, strongly agree. That's going to be that Likert scale. Likert type would be respond on 1, never, to 7, always, right? So Likert type follows that same format, but it uses different anchor points. That's really the only difference there. When we are designing survey items, we talk about semantic differential scales. So for each item, a respondent is given a numerical scale that's anchored by word opposites. So satisfied to not satisfied, 1 to 7, right? That's going to be that semantic differential. Open questions, they're going to use their own words to recall or respond to a question. So I might say, how did you feel about your satisfaction of this TikTok, right? I want you to answer that. I felt very unsatisfied because I didn't get a trigger warning. And with the disturbing nature of the content, I think that I should have been given one. I was not satisfied in that answer, right? Or in that non-option. That's going to be an open question. You are using your own words. We use this recall cue. So this is this process of drawing attention to the issue that we as the researchers are interested in, and we want to restrict, attention to specific types of interactions. So with this recall cue, I really want you to focus on this over here, and therefore I'm going to highlight this, and I want you to highlight it in your answers. Okay. Um, So when we choose between open and closed questions, we should use open questions if the respondent's words are very important and they're willing and can answer the question, the set of response choices is unknown, or we are willing to analyze the text. I don't know if you've ever gone through the process of transcription. It is a whole process, and that is very focused in qualitative research, but we can do it in quantitative as well when we have open-ended questions. If we're willing to analyze that text, we are allowing ourselves to let our participants speak for themselves. We should use closed questions if I apologize, sorry. There is an agreement on what this response set should be, and statistical analysis is desirable or necessary, right? So if there is an already agreed upon survey that is valid, that is reliable, and that's what we want to study, we can use closed questions. We can use those statements and just have you respond on Likert or Likert type scales. So when we're talking about the survey, we need to design the flow. We can pre-test or pilot test. This is when the researcher is going to try the survey or questionnaire with a small group of participants that are going to be similar to our desired population and make sure that we're getting the results that we need. So with pre-testing or pilot testing, we see this a lot in communication research. For my cohort, for my not dissertation, for my doctoral program, it was me and 2 other guys, so there are 3 of us in total, and all 3 of us should have used pilot testing. I had circumstances that prevented me from doing it, but I was the only one of the 3 that did not. That's how common it is. So with mine, because I had created different measures and my own story that my participants were going to read for my dissertation, I should have pilot tested that with a group of participants similar to who I wanted to, pull for my actual study. With pretesting, we talk about cognitive pretesting. This is going to allow the researcher to test for semantic problems or problems that can affect how easily the questions are understood. If we have questions that are worded funny, or we have questions that are double-barreled, so we're asking 2 things. I feel satisfied and happy. Well, what if I feel happy but I'm not satisfied, right? That's going to talk about issues for us cognitively later on. And without pretesting, we wouldn't have known that. Conventional pretesting. So the researcher is going to select several individuals who are like the people in the population. So this is that kind of classical pretesting approach. We want people who are going to be similar to our population overall, and we're just going to select them. We also talk about behavior coding. This is about third persons. They're going to monitor the interaction between interviewer and respondent. So if I'm asking you these questions, do you feel happy? Do you feel satisfied? Are you engaging with this topic, right? Things like that. Somebody else is going to be watching it from a distance, not necessarily a far distance, but they're going to be watching from afar, and they're going to code the behavior that's going on between the interviewer and the respondent. Okay? Finally, we talk about expert panels. So experts in research methodology or content are going to read through your questionnaire and they will bring up potential problems. When you have several people who are experts in the field, you can do this because it doesn't use as much time or resources necessary for pilot testing. There are some sample issues for surveys. First, the response rate. The number of people who respond after they have been contacted as part of the sample and asked to participate can be a problem. I believe I talked about this last week, but with the study I worked on with Dr. Kyle Miller, it was about traumatic brain injuries, concussions, and CTE in athletes and how journalists or professional journalistic reporting can impact individuals who have gotten concussions or traumatic brain injury, just by the words that they use, colloquial terms, right? So with this response rate, we wanted to actually measure working professionals. So what that means is I needed to reach out to professional organizations that deal with journalists and just journalistic organizations in general. So they are going to, potentially respond to my survey after doing their job while getting no compensation for doing my survey. You see what I mean? The response rate can be kind of an issue at times. Non-response. We can't obtain data from individuals in the sample. They didn't answer the questions. They didn't finish the survey. They didn't meet the inclusion or exclusion criteria. These are all things that we don't get responses because of. So we can analyze and report survey data. This is done through panels or longitudinal research designs. Data are going to be collected through survey techniques multiple times, more than once, right? We panel it based on year, month, whatever it is. When we talk about quantitative analysis of text, again, this doesn't happen as much in quantitative research as it does in qualitative research, but, and this starts chapter 12, by the way, we can do so through content analysis. So we summarize quantitative analysis of messages relying on scientific message, and we focus on the types of variables that may be measured or the context in which the messages are created or presented. So basically, what we do with the content analysis is we use the text or whatever it is in order to quantify it. When I was in my doctoral program at West Virginia, we did a summer Scholars Week course every summer where a former professor or a former doctoral student would come back and they would teach a class for 1 week. Our summer classes were only 3 weeks at WVU, but they would only teach for 1 week. So we'd be in there Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, and we would get an entire course done in that week. So for my Scholars Week course, I had to take a class on humor, which is not something that I like humor. I don't rely on humor. And we had to relate our primary area to the to humor in some way. I study health communication, and at the time I was thinking I wanted to focus in sexual health, and that was going to be the only type of health ads that were going to have humor. I also study mental health, and typically you're not going to see humorous print ads that I could analyze that content, right? It's just not going to be there. So I focused in sexual humor. And what I found was even sexual humor is not humorous for health campaigns. Who knew? So that is a content analysis. You're going through and you are analyzing the messages, the pictures, videos, advertisements, whatever it is. We can manifest content. So we provide a description of characteristics of the content itself. So we're just describing all the characteristics we see within this content. Okay. Continuing on with quantitative analysis of text, we talk about latent content. So these are interpretations about the content that imply something about the nature of the communicators or effects on the communicators. So with latent content, it's all about, we want to say that there is something about the people communicating this to us, or it's going to have us responding with this is going to have some sort of, excuse me, I'm so sorry, some sort of effect on the people who are communicating, right? So going back to that sexual health campaign, searching for humor, right? These advertisements that companies like Trojan put out, or PrEP for HIV, they tried to be humorous in some of their ads, right? It says something about them as communicators that, okay, this is something that we can laugh about, it's less serious. Or it can have effects on, okay, did this advertisement actually work to where I'm going to go purchase these products, whatever they may be, right? And if they are getting purchased, that's going to have an effect on the people who put out the message. And if they don't get purchased, that's going to have a different effect. So we talk about the content analysis process. First, we have to select what we want to code. Then we develop our content categories, so what we just went through. Next, we talk about a unit of analysis, so the discrete thing that is coded and counted. So how are we going to actually quantify this text or what we're seeing? And then we have to train coders, because you're going to want inner coder reliability, where I can rate something this way, and I expect that everybody on my team who is also rating things is going to rate them similarly. They do not have to be the exact same, but similarly to how I would rate them. So we get to coder reliability. So interrelated reliability, it's just calculations to make sure that all the coders are going to rate them similarly. So we can use it as unitizing reliability or categorizing reliability. Unitizing is all about the degree to which two or more observers are going to agree that some action, communication action, has actually taken place, and they can identify that action, and they can focus on it in the stream of the interaction. Categorizing is more frequently coders choose the same category, the greater degree their coding is. So unitizing is all about, we're rating things similarly. We're saying that the communication action has taken place, and I can tell you exactly where. And categorizing is, we're saying this is this, this is this, this is this, right? So for my sexual health and humor study, I had categories ranging from not humorous to humorous, and low humor orientation to high humor orientation on a scale of 1 to 5. And we kept putting each of these ads into different categories. based on our own personal preference. So what that meant was me and everybody who worked as a inter-rater or an intercoder for me, they chose the same categories as I did for the same ads, and that meant that the degree of our coding is going to be similar. So we have greater degree of reliability. We talk about Scott's pie. So two coders are being used because it accounts for the number of categories in the coding schemes, as well as for probable frequency, right? So we're using two coders and we have two categories. And with that, we're using these coding schemes and we find out this probable frequency. We also talk about Cohen's kappa. This is a measure of reliability for categorical data. So it ranges from perfect agreement 1.0 to chance agreement that I can't really say that it's anything better than expected by chance, right? This kind of goes back to what I was talking about a little bit with Chromebox Alpha with reliability. It's a different type of reliability, but Cohen's kappa kind of does the same thing. It's not the exact same, which is why we have Cohen's kappa and Chromebox Alpha, but 0 to 1. How much are we agreeing on that? Okay. And then validity. We talk about semantic validity. So this is the degree that analytical categories of content have been coded and have meaning for individuals within the particular context. So it's all about these categories that we code. They mean something for the individuals who are being surveyed. They mean something for the individuals within that particular context. Okay. We also talk about interaction analysis, and this is talking about coding the content of ongoing communication between two or more individuals. So I want to analyze what you're saying when you're saying it. So because we've been talking about a little bit of qualitative research, we go into chapter 15 and we design that qualitative research. So what is the researcher's role? First, participant observation. So researchers just observe the communication firsthand. They are not getting accounts secondhand or written reports. They are just observing everything as it happens in real time. First, complete participant. So the researchers act as a fully functioning member of the scene, but they don't reveal that they are simultaneously observing and assessing their actions. So they are in it. They are part of this interaction, but they're not telling you that they're also observing as well as interacting. Then there's participant as observer. The researcher is going to be both a participant and observer. They take an active role in interact. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. They take an active role within the interaction, so they are talking to everybody. They view the interaction as somebody inside the system, even though the other people know and accept that they are conducting research. So, complete participant, you do not reveal that you are observing. But if you're a participant as observer, people know that you are observing as well as taking an active role. You are a part of that system. And then we talk about observer as participant. So the researcher has negotiated entrance into this interaction. They observe with the intention of allowing the interaction to proceed as it naturally would. So they have made their way into the interaction. They observe the intent with the intention that they're going to allow things to happen naturally. They're not going to ask specific questions that are going to get the answer that they're necessarily looking for with their data. What that means is they're just kind of letting things happen, even though they're still considered a participant. And we talk about complete observer as well. So the researcher is going to enact only the observer role, and they are hidden from the interactants in the scene. What this might look like is focus groups where you want to find out what people are talking about with a specific product. And so you put them in a room and then you are watching from two-way glass, right? You are hidden from the interactants within the scene. They can't see you. They do not know that you are collecting that data. All right. They can have committed membership. So, peripheral members. They are insiders, but they don't take on activities that are central to the participants being observed. They are part of the system, but they're not joining in those activities. Active members, they participate in the interactions and activities just like the members are going to do as well. But they do not make a full commitment to the goals and values of the participants. So they interact, they engage with the activities just like everybody else. However, they're not focused on goals and values of the participants. They don't care why the participants are necessarily engaging with this interaction or activity. They don't care what the participants' values are necessarily. They just want to understand it while being invested. And then complete members. They conduct research in settings and collect data from participants in situations where they already have membership or where membership can be legitimately obtained. So what that means is they have already joined this group prior to was the correct term, I apologize, prior to collecting this data. Or they become members when they start collecting the data, but they go through the legitimate membership process. Okay. So let's talk about identifying the focus or the research focus. First, we need to consult the literature. We need to see what has been done about this topic, what will be done in our study, what are the gaps that people are coming up with, and why are they there? We use a concept map, so it's just a diagram of the research project where we just kind of make a list and start putting things where we want them, and we kind of start organizing things. Well, this comment was said and it goes with this, but it really explains this concept. So we're going to put it up here by that concept, right? We then go into our research questions and objectives. You can make hypotheses as well, but a lot of the times with this type of research, so sorry, research questions are really where we're finding our focus for the study. Okay. Lost my train of thought. I apologize. So, sampling and qualitative designs. First, we have snowball sampling. So, we get referrals from individuals who have already participated in the research. So, this might be, hey, will you chat with me for 5 minutes about this? After we've chatted, can you then give me the name or contact information of people who you think might be interested in engaging with the study as well? Then we talk about purposive, purposive. I don't know how to say that. Sampling. So researchers are going to select people or sites to be included in the study because that person or site is thought to be typical of the communication that's being investigated, right? So if we want to talk about, we want to research, I don't know, people who go to Comic-Con, right? I'm going to go to Comic-Con to sample individuals because people who go to Comic-Con are going to be typical of this communication activity or interaction that I want to investigate. Okay. We talk about maximum variation sampling. So we use this when we seek participants for the study who are going to vary with respect to the focus of our study. And we continue to seek additional participants until all the data received is redundant with the previously collected data. So we want participants to vary from each other in a way that we're going to get lots of information and we're going to keep collecting that data until we have redundancy. So we talk about gaining access. There is first this thing called the gatekeeper. This is a person who is going to have authority or credibility, excuse me, with the group or organization. So what this means is the person is either going to be a member of that organization or group, or they're going to have some pull with that organization or group, and therefore can help us get into that organization or group. They might act as a sponsor. This is somebody already in the group or organization that can act as a sponsor for researchers, right? So you get me into the organization, but you also kind of stay by my side throughout the entire research process because you have that authority and or credibility with the group. When we're talking about gaining access, we need to develop rapport. So, the process of developing trust and feelings of closeness, we should make the participants feel as though their feelings and ideas are going to be accepted and encouraged, right? You will not get data on things, especially taboo things, if you don't have that trust. Okay. Commitment acts are going to be an investment of time and energy on the part of the researcher. So the researcher is developing that rapport, they're gaining that trust, and therefore they're going to invest their time and energy to be able to collect that data. Locating key informants. Key informants are going to be one or a few people without the project cannot be completed, right? They're going to give us the information that we absolutely need. So, moving on to finalizing the research design. First, what questions are going to guide our study? And remember, this is all qualitative, so it's analysis of text, focus groups, content analysis. These are really what we're going for. So, what questions guide our study? Have we identified a site and participants? Have we negotiated access and entry to the site and participants? Have we considered potential ethical issues associated with our study? And do we need informed consent? Informed consent is this thing where anytime you're going to survey an individual, anytime that you are going to interview individuals, you need their permission. So they have to click, I consent, I do not consent, or they have to verbally say, yes, I consent to be in this study. And is it something we need? If we're using human subjects, absolutely yes, you do need informed consent. If you are asking them questions, if you are simply observing, and you have gotten this study approved by IRB, you probably don't need to get informed consent. It depends on what you want to do with your study. 6, what is the time frame for your study? How long are we going to run this collection time frame for? Have we selected one or more qualitative techniques for collecting data? Have we addressed credibility issues? Why are we credible to go in and collect this data? Have we considered how theory is going to inform our study? Are we working from established theory, or are we going to contribute to theory development? Contributing to theory development or creating theory is a very difficult task. I don't know who has ever said, oh yeah, I'm just creating theory because it's easy. I can do this in my sleep. We have lots of theory that's going to inform studies. We can use it as framework, and we can add to theory development, but it is a lot more difficult to contribute to theory development or theory creation than using theory to inform our study. Have we identified and acknowledged biases that we bring to the research process, right? If you are a person who has experience with the topic, you might bring in your bias about it. Okay. And that is the end of module 3. Again, I apologize, it is so long. However, we needed to get through all of this. So please keep up with the dates and everything that's going on, and I will see you next week. All right. Have a great week. See you next time.